It's pouring rain, and at school, zombies are headed toward a wooden barn. Outside, a guy, Jang Hong, bangs on the door, yelling to be let in. "It's me! They're coming! We need to save him!" Inside the barn, a group of terrified schoolgirls are hiding under a table while three guys are holding the door, unsure what to do. One girl freaks out, insisting they let Jang hang in because he's their classmate. How could they leave him to die? She's relentless, saying he's still talking, so he hasn't been bitten yet. One of the guys, though, panics, shouting that there are tons of zombies out there and Jang Hang's probably already infected. The girl, who is the class president, refuses to back down. She declares she'll take responsibility if anything goes wrong and accuses them of lacking a conscience, as Jang Hong is moments away from being killed. The tension rises. One guy grits his teeth and tells another classmate that, on the count of 3, he's going to open the door and they need to shut it fast once Jang Hang gets inside. The guy agrees, and they start the countdown. Everyone's frozen, holding their breath. As soon as the countdown hits 0, the door swings open. Suddenly, a zombie bursts through the door, knocking Ibi off his feet. Screams erupt as the kids panic. The stunned guy yells that Jang Hang is infected, causing everyone to scatter away from the door. Ibi raises his hand in defense, but the zombie bites down hard, sinking its teeth into his arm. He screams in agony as flashbacks flood his mind. He sees himself, one-armed and in excruciating pain, a horde of zombies, and the head girl shouting for them to run. Next, a vision of a burning city appears, followed by a mysterious dark sphere. A question lingers. "What do you want to do with it?" A hooded man responds, and the answer comes quickly. There are only 2 things he desires. The stranger pulls a lever, and the crowd watches as an adult man with one arm lies inside a time machine. As the lever is pressed, everything fades to darkness. Sparks fly, and a voice echoes. This is revenge and salvation. Then, in an instant, Ibi snaps back to the present, standing once again with his 2 classmates, gripping the door. He stood there, momentarily confused, as distant voices echoed around him. Someone was banging on the door, pleading desperately to be let in. Suddenly, another voice cut through the noise, demanding the door be opened immediately. It was the class representative, fiercely declaring that she wouldn't allow any of her classmates to be left behind. Ibi was shocked to see a face he hadn't seen in ages. Lee Ruoxi, still young. In the future he came from, things were very different, and seeing her like this caught him off guard. She was still shouting at them, using emotional blackmail, trying to guilt them into opening the door. A grin spread across Ibi's face, and he chuckled to himself. Never forget this day, he thought, relishing the moment. He was thrilled to finally be back in the past, where it all began. Ibi firmly stated, "There are tons of zombies out there. Jang Hang's probably already bitten." He pressed further, his voice cold. "Are you really willing to take responsibility for what happens if we let him in?" The class president, excited and defiant, challenged him. Did Ibi actually see Jang Hang get bitten? Placing her hand on her chest, she vowed, "If anything goes wrong, I'll take full responsibility." With a smile on his face, Ibi invited her, "Why don't you open the door yourself?" He extended his hand toward her, and everyone froze in surprise and anticipation. Lee Ruoxi exclaimed, offended, "What do you mean? Who's the man here, you or me?" The class president continued reproachfully, reminding Ibi that she was a girl and questioning how he could have no shame. Ibi raised an eyebrow, retorting, "What's there to be ashamed of? You're not scared. People like you just talk big while leaving the dirty work for others, so you can take all the glory in the end." Ibi called Lee Ruoxi a hypocrite, prompting her to scream that she had had enough. Determined, she approached the door, pushing aside her classmates. As soon as she turned the doorknob, the zombie burst into the barn, knocking those nearby to the ground. Ibi shouted, "The door has opened!" As chaos erupted, Lee Ruoxi lay on the floor, groaning in pain, staring in shock at the zombie looming over her. The creature opened its mouth, and the schoolchildren screamed in horror, realizing Jang Hong had become infected. One guy shouted that they were trapped. Lee Ruoxi grabbed him by the shirt, pleading for him to save her, pushing him toward the monster. But suddenly, Ibi, grinning predatorily, kicked her in the stomach, sending her tumbling right onto the zombie. As the creature prepared to bite her, Ibi swung a wrench, striking it hard in the skull. The defeated zombie fell to the floor, taking Lee Ruoxi down with it. Lee Ruoxi extended her hand to the guy, pleading for help, but he glared at her, filled with anger. She oppressed me for half my life. Now it's her turn, he thought. Instead of helping, he lifted the door and slammed it shut in her face. Lee Ruoxi, still lying on the zombie, screamed in desperation, "What are you doing?" But he just slammed the door harder. The other schoolchildren gasped in surprise as Ibi menacingly asked them why they were frozen. "We need to help him barricade." One guy responded that he would help, and soon another guy and a girl joined him. Together, they quickly stacked boxes and crates against the door. Meanwhile, Lee Ruoxi screamed in fear from outside, asking what they were doing, desperately knocking and begging to be let in for her own safety. Everyone continued to hold the barricade, while Lee Ruoxi shouted that they couldn't do this to her. She was their head girl. "Nobody moves," she yelled, warning someone outside not to come in. A scream pierced the air, but the schoolchildren stayed resolute, holding the door shut. Eventually, the screams faded into silence. Time passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon. One of the students remarked that Lee Ruoxi had stopped screaming. Another girl wondered if she had escaped. A guy behind them noted that he never expected them to kick out the head girl. Concern crept into a classmate's voice as she expressed how scared she was. Another girl chimed in, saying the guy had always been friendly, questioning why he had changed so much. Ibi stood by the door with a key, turning around menacingly after overhearing their conversation. The girls shut their eyes in fear as he asked with a smile, "Are you really afraid of me?" One of the girls quickly answered, shaking her head, "No, we're not afraid." A classmate by the door, still holding it, chimed in, thanking Ibi, saying that if it weren't for him, the guy would have died because of the head girl. A second student joined in, arguing that Lee Ruoxi deserved it. Because of her, everyone almost died. The third girl supported their comments, noting that thankfully Ibi had reacted quickly. Otherwise, they would have been in serious trouble. Another guy agreed, adding that the head girl had tried to set them all up. Ibi smiled wildly, pleased. "It's good that you're not afraid," he said, reveling in the chaos around him. Ibi asked them to open the door so he could step outside and look around, prompting everyone to stare at him in disbelief. One guy asked, "What did you just say?" Ibi replied, somewhat sarcastically, that it was really mean of him to kick out the head girl and that he wanted to see if she was still alive. Another guy scoffed, urging him not to make them laugh since there were still zombies outside. A third chimed in, saying it was way too dangerous. Frustrated, Ibi indignantly shouted for the door to be opened. One of the guys hurriedly complied, and Ibi stepped out with a wrench in hand. As he emerged from the barn, he noticed that neither the head girl nor Jang Hong was in sight. Did the zombies really leave because of dawn? He wondered, squinting against the bright sun and shielding his eyes with his hand. Suddenly, he heard a commotion behind him. His classmates, who had been watching the whole time, slammed the door shut. A voice from the other side yelled for them to hurry and barricade the door, preventing him from coming back in. Another voice added that he was too dangerous and questioned who he might kick out next. A third person remarked, "Look at that calm expression on his face. He's a natural-born killer." Ibi grinned, enjoying the chaos he had stirred, then looked back at the door, fully embracing the madness around him. The school children inside saw Ibi move forward, their surprise palpable. One of them asked if he was planning to visit them, but then screamed in horror as a zombie appeared on the street, charging straight at him. "Is this guy insane?" someone wondered, but Eb just grinned, squeezing the key in his hand tighter. He dashed toward the monster with determination. The students watching from the window were dumbfounded as the creature let out a terrible roar. With a fierce scream, Eb swung the wrench down, smashing the zombie's head in one blow. "He's really lost it!" one of the guys inside the barn exclaimed in shock. Breathing heavily, Eb lowered the wrench and bent down to the monster's head. He pulled out a small green ball, examining it closely. Joyfully, he exclaimed, "It's energy black gold." He held it up proudly, declaring, "This is the source of doomsday and an indispensable item for mechanics." Zombie footsteps echoed nearby, and Eb turned towards the sound, his face emotionless. An old zombie shuffled forward, locking eyes with him. Without hesitation, Eb gripped his wrench and slammed it down on the monster's head with all his strength. Inside the barn, two classmates watched in stunned disbelief. "Is this a joke?" one of them asked, still processing what they were seeing. Another, equally shocked, exclaimed, "Did Eb really decide to kill all the zombies?" A girl nearby, pale from what she'd just heard, looked nauseous. The fair-haired guy, still staring out the window, continued to comment, "Eb's character has really changed. Just recently he was a timid and inconspicuous guy. He turned to the others, asking, 'Was it all an act?' He's terrifying now." His classmate, struggling to process everything, muttered, "I can't believe Eb is actually this kind of person." In the back of the barn, a girl sat on the floor crying, while the others cowered in horror, hiding under the table, terrified of what they were witnessing. One of the guys, watching Eb relentlessly killing zombies, muttered, "If Eb's that good, maybe he should come back and help us fight." Another classmate in the barn immediately retorted in disgust, "Are you serious? Why would we want that madman back?" The first guy countered, "What else should we do? We're running out of food, and we can't stay hidden in this closet forever, waiting to die." Suddenly, a wrench smashed through the window, sending shards of glass flying toward them. They shielded themselves with their hands as Eb stood outside, asking, "Why are you just sitting in there? Come out and help me kill zombies. It's a blast." Two guys inside, trembling with fear, screamed in panic as a zombie crept up behind Eb, ready to strike. But Eb, always alert, reacted swiftly, kicking the monster in the head with force. Without hesitation, he continued his assault, bringing the wrench down on the zombie's face with brutal precision. The zombie's mouth gushed blood, its teeth shattering from the impact. With one final blow, it collapsed to the ground, utterly defeated. Eb stood over it, his breath steady, the once menacing creature now lying still at his feet. Classmates watched in horror from the window as Eb wiped zombie blood from his face and spat in disgust. "This black zombie liquid is revolting," he muttered. "What if it's contagious?" Eb paused, then turned back to the barn. "I was planning to stick with you guys," he said, his voice steady. "But since I can mutate, it might be better if we part ways here." His tone softened slightly as he added, "I don't want to hurt any of you. I really hope you all survive this time." Eb moves away from the barn, heading towards the school with a wrench resting casually on his shoulder. One of the guys watching him walk off asks, almost in disbelief, "Is he really leaving just like that?" No one answers, and a heavy silence fills the air. Eb walks through the empty school stadium, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He climbs the stairs with purpose, his mind set, and heads out into the open world. Judgment Day, he thinks to himself, the beginning of the end of humanity. A zombie virus had swept across the globe, infecting nearly 50% of the population. The result was chaos, total economic and political collapse. Every day, the number of zombies grew, and humans, gripped by fear and despair, fought each other relentlessly for food and shelter. plunging into a spiral of endless anarchy. Ibi continued forward, ready for whatever came next. Professor Jangan, a renowned expert on zombies, labeled this period the Dark Era. Ibi couldn't help but think back on it with bitter resentment. It was because of Lee Ruoxi's reckless actions that he had been bitten on the hand all those years ago. To survive, he had been forced to amputate his own hand. After that, his life spiraled into a nightmare. For 50 long years, Ibi wandered, starved, and endured unspeakable violence in a world overrun by chaos. His suffering seemed endless until, one day, he crossed paths with a mechanic. With his dying breath, the mechanic used the last of his strength to send Ibi back in time to the very moment when the apocalypse first began. Ibi continued to walk along the deserted city streets, seemingly unbothered by the surrounding chaos. Two men hid behind a makeshift barricade, watching him from a distance. One of them asked in surprise, "Is he really normal?" The other, just as confused, responded, "How can he just walk down the street with a smile on his face like he's not afraid of anything? Must be mad with hunger, thinking he's got nothing left to lose." He hesitated before adding, "Maybe we should call him over. It's too dangerous out there." But the second man shook his head. "Are you crazy? There's a crowd of zombies at our door, and for all we know, the guy's already infected." As they debated, Ibi kept walking, unaware or maybe just unconcerned about the three zombies standing by a nearby playground. The creatures spotted him, growled, and without warning, charged straight at him. One of the men behind the barricade shouted in panic, while the other muttered, "The guy's decided to die. Poor fool. Must be looking for food." But Ibi, he wasn't fazed. Ibi reacted swiftly, never losing the grin on his face. He was clearly enjoying it. With one smooth motion, he swung the wrench with one hand, decapitating the first zombie. Its disgusting blood sprayed everywhere, but it didn't slow him down. Just as quickly, he moved to the second, smashing its head in with brutal efficiency. The third zombie barely had a chance to react before he was knocked to the ground, its skull shattered beneath Ibi's relentless blows. The two men behind the barricade watched in stunned silence, horrified by what they had just witnessed. "What the hell? How cruel can someone be?" one of them muttered. From behind a nearby window, a curtain shifted. A woman, her eyes filled with anger, glared at Ibi as he wiped the blood from his face. She narrowed her gaze and whispered to herself, "Sooner or later I'll kill him." Ibi stood panting heavily beside the corpses of the fallen zombies. The silence didn't last long, though, as he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. 3 more monsters were coming straight for him. He looked at them with frustration and annoyance. As the creatures rushed toward him, Ibi thought to himself how a little noise had turned into such a big chase. Several people watching from behind the safety of their windows commented on the scene, one pointing out, "He's running here." Ibi, noticing a nearby shelter, darted toward it. He began banging on the iron gates, shouting at the security camera positioned near the entrance. "Let me in! I'm wounded, and zombies are chasing me," he pleaded. From a nearby house, 2 men observed the chaotic scene unfolding outside. The older man, nonchalant, lit a cigarette and scoffed. "After stirring up that crowd?" Only an idiot would open the door now. He exhaled a cloud of smoke, watching Ibi struggle with a detached sense of amusement. Beside him, the younger man squinted at the security monitors, frustration evident in his voice as he muttered, "I can't see anything from here." He leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of the grainy footage, his nervousness contrasting with the elders' calm demeanor. Despite their differences in attitude, neither made a move to help, leaving Ibi to face the horde alone. Ibi glanced down, realizing time was running out. Suddenly, one of the monsters rounded the corner and lunged at him. With quick reflexes, he swung his wrench, smashing the creature's head. But the others were still coming. Desperate, he threw the wrench at another zombie, causing it to fall. Without wasting a moment, he dropped to the ground and crawled under a small gap beneath the gate. It clanged shut behind him just as the creatures reached the barrier, scratching at it in vain. Eby, now safely inside, breathed heavily, his eyes scanning the area. Eby stood up, his eyes scanning the shelves lined with food in front of him. From behind a table, a girl cautiously watched him, her expression tense. Meanwhile, across the street, a group of guys inside a nightclub discussed the scene they had just witnessed. One of them asked in disbelief, "Did everyone see that?" Another chimed in, astonished. "Who would have thought that kid could kill a zombie?" The guy with a mohawk turned around, shaking his head in awe. 6 monsters, single-handedly, and he even managed to climb into the store across the street. A man sitting casually on a sofa, surrounded by 2 girls, laughed smugly. "Interesting," he said. "Looks like these zombies aren't as tough as we thought if a schoolboy can handle them. If he can do it, so can we." Back in the store, Eby's eyes landed on the girl. A grin spread across his face as he called out to her, "I see you. Why don't you come out? Oh, and hand over the remote control for the roller door quickly." The girl remained silent, frozen in place. Eby sighed theatrically, clutching his chest, and then bent over, pretending to be in pain. "It hurts," he said dramatically. "This wound. Please help me." Concerned, the girl rushed over with a first aid kit. As soon as she reached him, he grabbed her wrist, his grip firm. The girl's eyes widened in panic, and she stammered, "Let me go." Standing there, scared and wearing only her shirt, she trembled. Eby pulled her closer with a mischievous grin. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'm not going to eat you. You don't have to be afraid." Eby tightened his grip on the girl's wrist before letting go, his eyes fixed on the remote control in her hand. "Just give me the remote and I'll let you go," he insisted. The girl screamed, panic rising in her voice. "What kind of remote control are you talking about?" She held it tightly, her fear evident. Noticing her hesitation, Eby's tone turned sharp. "Just hand it over," he demanded. Eby snatched the remote in a flash, and the girl dashed behind the table, peeking around the corner with wide, frightened eyes. He caught the remote and kicked the shelf in frustration. "Are you an idiot?" he yelled. "I was just bluffing about the injury. How can you believe a stranger so quickly? You're way too easy to trick." Eby's harsh tone cut through the tension, mixing frustration with a strange sense of amusement. Eby recalled the painful memory of that rainy day from his past life. He had been lying on a bloody bed in a grocery store, and the same girl had bandaged his wounded hand, offering a smile of relief when she finished. Eby thanked her for saving him, and she replied that it was dangerous outside, explaining her father had told her to stay in the store. She took away the first aid kit, and as she left to gather food, Eby thought to himself what a kind girl she was. Throughout his long journey, she was the only person who opened the door for him, likely saving him from death by blood loss or a zombie bite. Suddenly, sounds from the first floor broke the silence. Eby overheard the girl asking a group of people what they were doing. Several men had entered the store. A tall man thanked her for opening the door, grinning maliciously. The girl, now frightened, questioned them, reminding them that they had said they were starving. The tall man dismissed her words coldly, saying it no longer mattered because all the food in the store now belonged to them. 2 men behind the tall man smirked, their expressions filled with malice. The tall man stepped closer, grabbing the terrified girl's face. She struggled, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Please let me go. My father will be back soon." The tall man's cruel smile deepened as he responded coldly, "We've already met your father?" He paused, savoring her growing fear. "We used him as bait to lure the zombies away. So it's just you and us now." His words sent a chill down her spine as he continued with a twisted grin, "And nothing's going to stop us from doing whatever we want." He licked his lips in anticipation, his eyes gleaming with perverse intent. The girl's face turned pale with horror, her heart pounding as the gravity of the situation sunk in. She was completely at their mercy. While the men tormented and mocked the girl's father, things took a dark turn. She was abused, raped, and ultimately killed, all because of her kindness. Meanwhile, Eb had been hiding behind a wall, paralyzed with fear, covering his mouth to stay silent. She was lying there dead, and I was too much of a coward to do anything to leave the one person who saved my life and gave me food in this apocalypse, Eb thought bitterly, filled with regret. Back then, Eb had been paralyzed by fear, but now he swore to himself that he would repay that debt and save her. Still, he thought grimly, she needed to understand that darkness lurked even under the sun. Even if it made her think poorly of him, she had to face this harsh reality. In the present, Eb was interrupted by a knock on the door. Annoyed, he shouted, asking what she wanted and to stop bothering him while he showered. The girl, standing outside, quietly explained that she had noticed his dirty clothes and brought him fresh ones. Eb winced and told her to leave the clothes at the entrance and get out immediately. With her head down, the girl left. Eb muttered to himself, wondering how someone so obedient could survive in a post-apocalyptic world. It didn't matter, though. He hadn't had a shower this good in a long time. With zombies multiplying, clean water was becoming scarce, and the supply here would likely be cut off in a few days. Stepping out of the stall and drying his hair with a towel, he felt lucky to have the store's resources. At least they'd last a while. Eb stared at himself in the mirror, deep in thought. He realized it was time to start hunting for proper equipment and weapons. Seeing himself young again brought a strange sense of nostalgia. No back pain, no aching legs, youth felt like a blessing. Youth felt. Touching his stomach, he smirked and muttered that he needed to work on his abs. Stepping out of the shower, he noticed the clean clothes left by the door. He picked up a white shirt, inspecting it closely. "Why this suit?" he yelled in frustration. "How am I supposed to fight zombies in this?" The girl, sitting downstairs, heard his outburst and was left confused, unsure of what she had done wrong. At the nightclub, Scolopendra stood confidently in the center of the room, resting a knife on his shoulder. His voice cut through the air as he told everyone to listen up. This karaoke bar might have alcohol and food, but it wouldn't be enough to survive long term. They needed to create a new survival base to handle the hardships ahead. Pointing the blade of his knife towards the store, where zombies crowded the entrance, he declared that they would kill all the monsters, take over the store, and secure their supplies. He grinned, adding that there was a cute little girl living in the store. If his memory was right, she was the only one left, except for some schoolboy who'd recently shown up. Two men exchanged glances, their expressions turning predatory. Scolopendra barked the order. They would kill the zombies, seize the food, and take the girl. The group, armed with various weapons, laughed as they prepared to move out and rush towards the store. In the grocery store, the girl sat nervously eating when she heard Eb's approaching footsteps. He appeared, now dressed in clean clothes, and demanded she answer his earlier question. Standing over her, he asked if she lived alone and where her family was. Timidly, the girl explained that her father had gone to get supplies and promised to return soon. Without warning, Eb slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising in anger. "You're a fool!" he shouted. "Why would you let a stranger in when you're alone? Are you seriously not afraid I might do something to you?" Startled, the girl tried to explain, trembling. "You said you were hurt. I saw you covered in blood." Eb cut her off harshly. "Didn't you see the zombies chasing me? Did you even think about what was going on?" The girl, overwhelmed, covered her ears as he yelled. She stammered that she had seen. It all on the CCTV cameras, and yes, there were many zombies. Frustrated, Eb rubbed his temples. "You're such a naive coward," he muttered. You'll just be a burden eventually, and it might be better to get rid of you now. Pausing, he sighed, and then continued. But I'd be bored without someone around, and I need someone to take care of me. So listen carefully, you're going to do whatever I say from now on. His eyes bore into hers as she stared back in shock, clutching her chest in fear. And if you disobey me even once, he added coldly, pointing directly at her, I'll kill you. Outside the nightclub, chaos erupted as a horde of zombies charged toward the armed men. A monstrous figure bit down on a guy with a mohawk, tearing into him while the others quickly overwhelmed him. His screams filled the air, but he was helpless against the relentless assault. One man shouted in disbelief, "Why are they going crazy all of a sudden?" Another, trying to make sense of the situation, pointed out, "But that schoolboy somehow beat them." Scolopendra, unfazed by the panic, roared, "Kill the monsters! Push forward, or we'll all die here." His commanding tone echoed, but fear was spreading through the group. One of the men, unable to cope, turned to flee, but Scolopendra grabbed him by the hair, dragging him back and tossing him into the ravenous crowd of zombies. "How can you do this?" the man cried, but his question was cut short as the zombies devoured him. The rest continued their desperate fight, hacking away at the seemingly endless tide of undead. Someone asked in a panic, "Why are there more and more?" No matter how many we kill, they keep coming. Realizing they were losing ground, Scolopendra barked, "Retreat!" In an instant, the remaining survivors scrambled, fleeing from the overwhelming horde as the undead closed in. In the store, the girl entered the room where Ibi was sitting with ball he found in the zombie's head. She shyly informed him, "I made noodles for you that you asked for," placed the thermos of boiling water on the table. Ibi, preoccupied with his thoughts, looked at her and replied coldly, "I don't need anything else for now. Leave and don't disturb me until I call for you." Nodding, the girl quietly left, and the door shut behind her. Ibi opened the noodle package and began eating. The taste sparked a wave of nostalgia, but he knew that in a few years, food like this would become a rare luxury. As he ate, he heard a commotion outside and glanced out the window, curious about the noise. Suddenly, the window shattered. A hand grabbed the windowsill. It was Scolopendra, the man from the nightclub. He growled angrily, cursing the zombies chasing him. Only now did he notice Ibi calmly eating noodles, staring back at him. "Help me climb up, kid," Scolopendra barked, desperation creeping into his voice. "You know I'll kill you if you don't." Ibi glared at him with clear distaste, picking up the thermos the girl had brought. Scolopendra's eyes darted nervously to the thermos. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, fear edging his voice. Without a word, Ibi twisted the lid and poured the scalding water over Scolopendra's hand. The man screamed in agony, releasing his grip on the windowsill. Ibi smirked darkly. "If you're going to kill me, I'd rather kill you first." At that moment, two small hands clutched Ibi's sleeve. He turned to see the girl, her eyes wide with fear, pleading softly. "Please stop. Let him in. Don't hurt him." Scolopendra, still reeling from the burn, turned his gaze to her at the same time as Ibi. Ibi scowled, his voice filled with frustration. "I told you not to come in unless I called for you. Besides, you don't even know this man." With tears in her eyes, the girl quietly responded, "My dad always said, you shouldn't hurt people." For a moment, the room was filled with silence. Ibi stared at her incredulously. "Are you seriously not afraid I might kill you?" The girl hesitated, her uncertainty giving Scolopendra the perfect moment to exploit. His voice, dripping with false sincerity, filled the room. "I don't mean any harm. I was just hungry and desperate. The zombies trapped me, and I had no choice but to come here. Please let me stay, just until it's safe." As he spoke, Scolopendra slowly climbed through the window, nearly inside the room. Ibi clenched his jaw, glancing back at him with frustration. He knew he should have thrown the man back into the horde when he had the chance. But killing him in front of the girl would only complicate things, making his already tenuous control over her fragile trust even harder to maintain. With the corner of his eyes, he observed a paper cutter lying on the table. Skolopendra's grin widened as his foot touched the floor. Ibi's eyes flicked to the knife resting on the table. The man grinned smugly, brushing off the dust from his clothes. "Thanks for your kindness," he sneered. "But now this place belongs to me. Anyone who disobeys will die." The girl stood frozen, her face drained of color as the horrifying realization set in. Ibi could see her trembling, caught between fear and the naivety that had allowed Skolopendra to exploit her goodwill. Meanwhile, back at the nightclub, the situation was growing desperate. A crowd of zombies battered at the doors, their ravenous growls echoing through the room. Two men who had managed to escape the worst of the chaos pressed themselves against the doors, holding back the relentless horde. One of them, struggling to keep the door shut, yelled in panic, "The zombies are about to break through! We can't hold them any longer!" The other man, his face twisted in anger, spat back, "If it weren't for that idiot's plan, we could have lasted here for months. Where the hell did Skolopendra go after we got swarmed? He's probably hiding on that store's roof. Let him die there for all I care." As the pressure from the zombies mounted, the door began to buckle. One of the men shouted to two girls sitting off to the side on the sofa, "Stop crying and get over here and help hold the door!" But in his mind, the man was already plotting his escape, smiling at the thought of ditching everyone else. His eyes darted toward the balcony. "All that's left is to run and jump while they're distracted with the door," he thought smugly. Skolopendra's laughter filled the room, dripping with malice as he taunted, "This girl is so cute. Did she really choose to believe me?" He smirked, his gaze locking onto her trembling form. "Don't be scared," he said, almost mockingly. "I won't kill you. No. Instead, I'll teach you everything. We'll be together passionately." His smile widened as he invited her to become his slave. The girl was frozen in place, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding in front of her. Then Skolopendra turned his attention to Ibi. "And you," he snarled. "How dare you? Scald me with boiling water? Feeding you to the zombies would be too easy. No, I need time. Time to think of a proper way to torture you, then kill you." His eyes gleamed with madness as he described what he planned to do. "I'll crush your bones, then cut off your limbs. When they're dried out, I'll stuff them into flower vases. It'll be a masterpiece." Ibi stayed silent, his grip tightening around the utility knife in his hand. He could feel the cold metal, steadying him against the chaos around him. His mind raced, trying to decide whether to strike now or wait for the right moment. But one thing was certain. Skolopendra wasn't leaving that room alive. Suddenly, the girl, still trembling but trying to mask her fear, spoke up. "Our family owns this store," she said quietly, then continued more confidently. "There's a lot of food downstairs, enough for everyone." Skolopendra turned to her, a look of surprise flickering across his face. Even Ibi, still clutching the knife, shifted his gaze toward her. "We have hot sticks, chocolates, instant noodles," she added, her voice gaining strength. "And bear-shaped cookies, too." Skolopendra raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the girl's sudden change in tone. She smiled widely, almost innocently, as she continued, "It's better for us to enjoy everything together. Once we're full, we'll forget all our problems, right?" Her words hung in the air, an eerie contrast to the tension in the room. Skolopendra screamed, clutching his severed hand, his face twisted in agony. Ibi gripped the knife, ready for another strike, but Skolopendra reacted quickly, catching Ibi's hand mid-swing. With a powerful kick to the stomach, Ibi was sent crashing to the floor, the girl falling beside him. Scolopendra, shaking from the pain, smiled maniacally through gritted teeth, declaring that nothing had ever taken so much from him as Ebe had. Ebe, gasping for breath, felt sharp pain shoot through his side. His ribs were likely broken. Scolopendra stepped hard on his foot, eliciting a scream of pain from him. The man leaned in, demanding to know how Ebe had dealt with the zombies so effortlessly. "We lost many men, and we only managed to kill a few," he spat. But before he could finish, Ebe grinned, his eyes filled with defiance. "If you really want to know," he said, through clenched teeth, "you'll have to show a little respect first." Scolopendra's face twisted with contempt. "Respect? Since you won't talk, I'll trample you to death instead," he sneered, launching a series of brutal kicks while Ebe lay helpless on the ground. The girl watched in horror, frozen with fear. Ebe's thoughts raced as the blows landed. Trying to teach this girl a lesson is already costing me dearly. But then, he shouted desperately, "Stop! I know the way, I'll tell you!" Scolopendra paused, grabbing Ebe by the shirt and pulling him close. "If you tell me, maybe I'll make your death quicker," he hissed. But Ebe, ever defiant, spat in Scolopendra's face. Furious, Scolopendra hurled Ebe into the wall with all his strength and then followed up with a savage kick to the stomach. "You think this is a game?" Scolopendra raged, his voice filled with madness. "We'll play until death!" he roared, raining down kicks, his voice growing louder as he screamed, "Die!" before landing a vicious kick straight to Ebe's face. At that moment, the girl, trembling but determined, grabbed the stationary knife and drove it into Scolopendra's shoulder. He turned, surprised and enraged, and shoved her aside, grabbing the knife. He screamed that he'd kill her, but before he could strike, Ebe, with all his remaining strength, smashed a stool over his head, sending Scolopendra crashing to the floor. Ebe, exhausted, sat down and sighed. "Well, he's not dead yet. Stop whining and go wash up." The girl, still stunned, asked again, "He's not dead? We need to help him." Frustrated, Ebe shoved her out the door. "I've never met someone so weak-minded. She's just a fool," he thought bitterly. "And this freak ruined my room." Without another thought, Ebe grabbed Scolopendra by the leg and dragged him to the window. With one swift motion, he threw the man out onto the roof. Scolopendra's body fell toward the street, where the zombies immediately swarmed him. Scolopendra lay surrounded by a writhing mass of zombies, their decaying fingers clawing and grasping at him. His eyes fluttered open just as a searing pain shot through his skull. A zombie had sunk its teeth deep into his flesh. Another reached inside his mouth, grotesquely tugging at his cheek, stretching the skin in a horrifying display. More zombies piled on top of him, their rotting hands tearing into his flesh, feasting upon him with unrestrained hunger. Ebe stood at the window, a silent observer of the gruesome scene below. He watched with cold detachment, his expression unchanged, as chaos erupted around Scolopendra. No flicker of sympathy crossed his face. "If only I had a better knife. I would have cut off your arms and legs before tossing you out." These are the parting words he got from him. Ebe called out, asking if there were any survivors nearby. The man, nervously glancing around, replied that there was no one left. They had tried to block the doors, but someone had eventually loosened their grip, allowing the zombies to break in. "Now everyone is dead," he said, desperation in his voice. Yes, the man is asking Ebe for help, hoping that he might offer some kind of assistance in the dangerous situation he's trapped in. Ebe simply declined the man's desperate plea. "No," he said coldly. "If you don't want to end up as zombie food like that trash down there," he gestured toward Scolopendra's remains, "you better run while you still can." The guy glanced back at where Scolopendra lay beneath a writhing mass of zombies. Horrified, he pressed himself harder against the pipe before pushing off and leaping to the next balcony. Ebe watched him coldly, thinking, "Pity the zombies didn't finish off all the garbage. Let's hope he doesn't cause any more problems. As night fell, E.B. opened the door and saw the girl still sitting on the floor, her eyes fixed on the blood streak by the window. He sighed. "Why are you still here? I told you to take a shower." She looked up, her voice soft and uncertain. "Did he escape?" E.B. smirked. "Do you seriously believe he made it past all those zombies? Only if he wasn't human." Her face dropped in sadness. "Why did you kill him, even if he was bad? Maybe he could have changed." Frustrated, E.B. slammed his hand against the wall. "You're such a fool! Haven't you ever heard of the fable about the farmer and the viper? He was a bad man. If you try to save someone like that, they'll just turn on you." His voice sharpened with each word. "This is the end of the world. You either kill people like him or they'll kill you. Don't you get that?" She stared at him, her expression pensive. "The apocalypse." E.B. turned away, feeling exhausted. "It's pointless talking to you. I'm going for another shower. My whole body aches." The girl walked towards E.B., as if trying to say something, but before she could finish, she slipped and fell against him. Concern flashed across E.B.'s face. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, quickly picking her up and carrying her to the bed. He leaned over her, checking for injuries, pressing his hand against her forehead. She was burning up. Something was definitely wrong. E.B. rushed to the closet, rummaging through it. There had to be medicine somewhere. As he searched, his thoughts raced. This had been going on for too long, but he couldn't recall why. Finally, he found a first aid kit. Exactly what we need, he thought, relieved. As he opened it, a small pink book caught his eye. Curiosity got the better of him, and he flipped through it. It wasn't just any book, it was a personalized journal of donations. In the pages, the girl had written about her chemotherapy sessions. "It didn't hurt at all today," one entry read. "I even got to play with my friends. The doctor said that thanks to many people's help, I could get treatment. So, in the future, I want to be kind like them." E.B. froze. This wasn't just a random notebook, it was her medical record. He looked back at the unconscious girl, the reality sinking in. The record included her age and diagnosis: leukemia. Her name was Yao Yu-er, and she was only 14 years old. E.B. gently lifted the sleeve of the girl's shirt, revealing her arm covered in bandages. Her legs, too, were wrapped the same way. He stared for a moment, trying to process it all. Was this really why she wanted to save that monster of a man, Scolopendra? It didn't make sense to him. The world that was kind to her, it no longer exists, he thought grimly. Reaching into his pants pocket, E.B. pulled out the energy black gold. He stared at it, feeling its weight in his hand. "I have this," he muttered to himself. But could it help? The night dragged on, silent and heavy, as he pondered. By the time morning light crept in, the question still lingered. E.B. woke up and sat back, watching as Yao Yu-er prepared to leave and make breakfast. "Are you feeling better?" he asked. She nodded, a hint of relief in her voice. "Yes, I am. Till have instant noodles. Don't forget to add sausage," he called after her. Just as she was about to leave, he added, "And get your things ready. We're going to search for your father." She didn't understand what he meant. Yao Yu-er paused, looking at him in surprise. "We're going to look for my dad?" she asked, as if trying to confirm. E.B. nodded. "You said he went out for supplies, right? This place doesn't feel safe anymore, so I want to find him and leave with you. But my dad told me to stay here until he got back," she explained nervously. "He said to lock myself in and not go anywhere." "How long has it been since he left?" E.B. asked. Yao Yu-er hesitated, then lowered her head. "About 3 days." E.B. raised an eyebrow. "How long does it usually take him to get supplies?" "About half a day," she replied quietly. E.B.'s voice grew more serious. "He's been gone for 3 days without any word. What do you think might have happened? Zombies? A trap? If he's waiting for help, who's going to save him if we don't? Yao Yuer trembled at the thought and shouted, "Nothing happened to him. He called me and said he'd be back soon." Ibi looked at her, his tone steady but firm. "And yet he hasn't come back. No news. If we don't go, who will?" The girl replied that her dad had told her not to leave the place until he returned. Ibi stood up angrily and walked toward her. "Stupid. He must be in trouble now and you don't want to help him. Would you rather save that freak gangsters than your father?" Yao Yuer began to shake, struggling to respond. Ibi pointed a finger at her, asserting, "I didn't ask for your opinion. I could just kill you and leave, but I want to help you because you saved my life. So we're going to search for your father. That's how I repay my debt." He shouted for her to shut up and get ready quickly. Yao Yuer screamed and dashed up the stairs, almost tripping. Ibi rubbed his temples, feeling exhausted. "What a nightmare," he muttered. A crowd of zombies gathered in the city street, drawn by a noise as a car sped toward them, knocking them down without slowing. Meanwhile, in the grocery store, Ibi was packing a bag of groceries. He glanced at Yao Yuer and asked what she was hiding and if she was ready. The girl emerged from behind a wall, dressed in a blue sundress with a backpack slung over her shoulder. Ibi frowned, saying she looked too dressed up for their mission, as if they were going to a picnic. She stayed silent. He asked if she had prepared the noodles, and she nodded. As he ate breakfast, Yao Yuer sat quietly. Ibi thought it best to wait until the sun was high in the sky before rushing out to kill the zombies at their door. He remembered there were many cars on the road in good condition and hoped to find one he could start. He planned to return for her, hoping she wouldn't cause any trouble. While Yao Yuer snacked, he asked if she had any sharp sticks to share. Just as she handed him the package, a car barreled into the store at high speed, sending shelves crashing. Ibi instinctively shielded the girl with his body and exclaimed in surprise, "Is it an earthquake?" Turning around, he realized an SUV had crashed through the roller door. The driver, a man in military uniform, stepped out with a smile. "What a great store! Looks like I found a treasure," he said, kicking the remains of the zombies. "Good zombies are dead zombies, even if they are already the walking dead." He raised his hand and declared he would take everything from the store. The man stepped inside, laughing with delight as he spotted a shelf of chips and bear cakes, his favorites. He began stuffing them into a bag, commenting that most supermarkets in the city were likely looted, so he planned to hit more remote areas next. Suddenly, a knife was pressed to his neck as Ibi warned him that any sudden move would mean death. "Better drop what you've taken," Ibi said, "unless you want to become zombie food." The man started sweating, panicking as he quickly threw the snacks at Ibi. Unexpectedly, the man stood up, grabbed the bag of loot, and rushed outside. Ibi chased after him, pointing the knife and shouting that the thief would die. The man screamed, begging for mercy and surrendering by raising his hands. Just then, Yao Yuer cried out for Ibi to stop killing people. The guy turned around to see Yao Yuer standing there, hesitating as she said that the store was damaged because of the stranger. "If you kill him, there will be no one to pay for the damage," she pointed out. Ibi remained silent, still holding the knife to the man's neck. The man, attempting to smile, agreed with the girl. Ibi then turned to him and declared that he had a good car, which now belonged to them as payment for the store. "You'll be our driver," he said. The man, trembling in fear, complied. Ibi asked Yao Yuer to help load supplies into the car. She looked at him questioningly, while the man awkwardly begged for forgiveness, explaining he only drove into the store because he was hungry and hadn't known anyone was there. As Yao Yuer struggled with a large bag of supplies, she spotted a crowd of zombies, approaching and shouted a warning. The man, annoyed, mentioned that he had just crushed a bunch of them. Ibi ordered everyone to get into the car, and once they were inside, the man started the SUV, reminding them to fasten their seatbelts. The car quickly sped off, crashing through zombies in its path, while Ibi and Yao Yu Air braced themselves in the cabin, shaken. The man pressed the gas pedal harder, laughing as he continued to mow down the undead. While laughing like a villain of a flop film, Ibi shouted, demanding to know what was wrong with the man. "Did you decide to kill them all?" he threatened, pointing his knife at the driver. The man, scared, stammered that he needed to clear the zombies before leaving. Besides, he pointed out, Ibi hadn't specified their destination yet. Turning to Yao Yu Air, Ibi asked where her father might be. She replied that he had mentioned the Eastern Market during their last phone call. The man winced at the mention of the market, noting it was always crowded and likely overrun with zombies. Ibi frowned and told the man to stop whining. If they were going there, they were going there. The driver nervously agreed, and they sped through the city streets. The stranger asked if he could turn on the music since the ride was painfully boring. Ibi, displeased, snapped that he shouldn't make noise. In response, the man cheerfully declared he'd just sing instead, claiming he was good at it. Ibi threatened to shut him up, while Yao Yuer giggled at the exchange.